A young mother was home alone one evening when she heard strange noises in her attic. At first she assumed it was just squirrels or maybe some pipes making noise. But then the scratching sounds started getting louder and more insistent. The floorboards above her head began to creak and groan, like something heavy was dragging itself closer to her bedroom. She tried to convince herself that it was nothing to worry about, but her fear kept growing until finally she had no choice but to investigate. What she found up there would change her life forever. As she slowly climbed the attic stairs, each step creaking ominously beneath her weight, she strained to listen for any sound above her. All she could hear was the steady drip of a leaky pipe and her own ragged breathing. The air in the attic was thick with dust and the smell of decay, and a single bare bulb cast long, distorted shadows around her. With trembling hands, she pushed open the attic door, its rusty hinges screaming in protest. The sight that greeted her was both fascinating and horrifying. In the corner, shrouded in cobwebs and dust, sat a large wooden chest, its surface intricately carved with grotesque faces and symbols she didn't recognize. But the chest wasn't the only thing that had caught her eye. There, scrunched up in the far corner, as if trying to hide from view, was a small, intricately woven basket. It looked out of place amongst the dusty trunks and boxes, and a sudden chill ran down her spine for no apparent reason. She cautiously approached the basket, half expecting it to spring to life and flee, and gently lifted it from the floor. Its weave was surprisingly soft under her touch, like a caress from a phantom hand. And as she turned it over, she noticed a small inscription on the bottom. The letters were faded and difficult to decipher, but she could make out the words, "Beware what you unleash." A shiver ran down her spine, and she quickly put the basket back where she found it, hoping to forget about it. But as the days passed, the basket continued to haunt her dreams. She'd see it sitting in the corner of her eye, waiting for her to return so it could be opened. Its presence became a constant, unwelcome guest in her thoughts, and she found herself inexplicably drawn to it. One evening, unable to resist its silent call any longer, she went back to the attic to retrieve the basket. The attic was pitch black, the single bulb having burnt out, and the only light came from the sliver of moon hanging in the inky sky. She felt her way along the wall until her fingers brushed against the familiar rough weave of the basket. As she lifted it, a sudden crash from somewhere above her sent her heart racing. Was someone else in the house? Her rational mind told her it was probably just a branch from the tree scraping against the roof, but her gut screamed danger. Still, she couldn't bring herself to leave the basket behind, and so with trembling hands, she carried it down the creaking attic stairs and back to her bedroom. There, in the safety of her room, she finally got a good look at the basket. It was oval-shaped, about the size of a small pillow, and made of a material that felt like tightly woven straw. She ran her fingers over its surface, tracing the intricate patterns woven into it. The patterns seemed familiar somehow, like a half-remembered dream. Then she noticed something else. There were faint scratches on the inside of the basket, like tiny claws digging into the weave. A low growl rumbled in her stomach, and she suddenly felt very alone. Her husband was away on business, and her young son was spending the weekend with his grandparents. It was just her in the house, and she couldn't shake off the feeling that she was being watched. The growl from earlier must have been her imagination, because moments later, she heard a loud thump from the floor above. Her blood ran cold. There was no way anyone could be in the house. She'd locked up before leaving for work that morning and hadn't seen or heard anyone since. Had she been followed home? Suddenly, the doorknob to her bedroom began to turn. She screamed and dropped the basket, which landed at her feet with a thud. The scratching sound started again, this time coming from the door. Panic surged through her veins. She scrambled back, knocking over her bedside table in her haste, and fumbled for the door handle, but it was too late. The door burst open, and a dark, hulking shape loomed in the doorway. She screamed again, her voice echoing in the empty hallway. The creature took a step forward, and she could see its eyes gleaming in the darkness, two burning embers in the night. Then it lunged. She woke up with a gasp, her heart pounding in her chest, and the cold sweat of fear clinging to her skin. The nightmare had been so real, she could still feel the creature's hot breath on her neck, hear its guttural growl in her ears. Around her, the soft glow of dawn was filtering through her curtains, and the sounds of birds chirping filled the air. It was just a dream, she told herself, reaching out to steady herself against the headboard. Just a bad dream. But then she saw it. Sitting on the floor beside her bed was the basket. She had never placed it there. Had she brought it into bed with her? The thought sent another jolt of fear through her, and she quickly got out of bed to search for her phone. She needed to call her husband, tell him to come home, tell him about the basket, about the nightmares. But as she reached for the phone, her eyes caught something else. On the wall, scrunched up in the corner as if trying to hide, was a piece of cloth. She cautiously approached it and gently lifted it from the wall. It was a scrap of the coarsest burlap, like the kind used for sacks, and it looked as though it had been there for a long time. As she stared at it, the memories flooded back. This was the same fabric that had been wrapped around the chest in the attic, the chest with the grotesque carvings, the chest she had never opened. With trembling hands, she raced back to the attic, the piece of cloth clutched in her fist. The attic was empty. The chest was gone. In its place was a single sheet of paper, and on it was written, "Whatever you do, do not open the chest." She ripped the paper and let it fall to the floor. Her hands were shaking. She could feel her heart pounding in her throat, but she couldn't stop herself. She needed to know what was inside that chest. Taking a deep breath to calm her nerves, she knelt down and began to pry it open. The wood was old and dry, and it gave way easily to her touch. She lifted the lid, revealing a hollow space within, but there was nothing inside the chest. She searched, her fingers trailing along the grooves and crevices, but found nothing, so she did the only thing she could think of. She flipped the lid over, and there, scrunched up in the corner, was a small piece of cloth like a doll's dress. She picked it up and held it to her face, inhaling deeply. The scent hit her like a ton of bricks, stale and cloying, like rotting flesh. Suddenly she knew. This wasn't just a doll's dress, it was a shroud. And she heard it then, a faint scratching sound coming from underneath the chest. The sound grew louder, and with it, the stench of decay. Then the wood beneath the chest began to move, splintering and cracking, and from beneath it something clawed its way out. It was skeletal, with long, sharp claws, and teeth bared in a silent snarl. And as it climbed out of the chest, she could see that it wasn't alone. Behind it, more creatures stood, their eyes burning with unholy fire, and they all seemed to be staring right at her.